All right, now the fun part and really the main purpose of the session, the incident response playbook, right? And just to reiterate, everything before in the proper preparation phase is really, really critical to make sure this part of it goes successfully. So step zero of this is actually an incident is identified. So whether that's Veeam that identified the incident, whether that's XDR, EDR tools that identify the incident, or unfortunately, whether that's just somebody asking you for ransomware payment and that's what identified the incident. That's essentially the first step of all of this. And
with Veeam 12.1 that was released towards the end of last year, we incorporated inline entropy analysis. So that's iterative process that's happening during the backup process. So we're seeing change rates, whether that's encryption that's happening from a previous and current point, be able to indicate some stuff, highlights from a ransomware attack. It's happening on the backup proxy, so during that backup process. And then the other side of things is looking for suspicious files in the file system of the items that we're backing up, looking specifically at malware links or file extensions that have association with malware, being able to trigger those and be able to trickle that up to the management interface as possible suspicious activity.
And with that, for folks who haven't heard, we acquired a company called Coveware. Really exciting announcement, really impressive firm with a litany of expertise. Just to give you an overview of what this incident response firm provides in the case where you do declare an incident and you need their services, it's really four key things, right? The number one thing is their ability to do an assessment, right? So they're able to go in and help you do that part of the scope where you identify, okay, what data was encrypted or what data was compromised, and they leverage this with a tool called Recon. And what's really powerful about this tool is oftentimes what they see is an attacker might have manipulated a lot of data files where they changed the extensions or changed the names or things like that. But really, they might have only encrypted 10% of what they say they actually did. So this tool is able to quickly go in and help you understand, okay, what data truly is encrypted in here, as well as what they're also really powerful for is they have one of the most powerful data feeds on ransomware really in the world, right? I mean, we've seen presentations where the FBI actually references Coveware's data source as part of their presentations. And so they're able to tell you, hey, we know what this ransomware group typically does, or this ransomware strain typically does. If you don't pay the ransom, we can pretty confidently tell you they're going to harass you to the sense of they're going to DDoS attack the heck out of your environment, or they're going to not physically, but they're going to harass your employees or customers and ask them to say, hey, we took your data, pay us $50. And on the flip side of that, if you don't pay the ransom, or if you do pay the ransom, they're able to help you understand, okay, are they still going to give you the decryption tools? Are they going to give you decryption tools that are completely useless? So they're really able to help you understand how, based on each type of ransomware group, how you might want to respond and what their behaviors are going to be. The next is their expertise in terms of negotiation and settlement. That's certainly the last thing they ever want to do is have you pay the ransom. That's the first thing they'll tell you. They'll never advise you to pay the ransom. That's ultimately on you. But what they do see is in the cases that you find that there's no choice but to, maybe for various reasons, they have a lot of success in negotiating that ransomware payment down significantly, as well as they handle all that process, right? They handle the payment, they handle the cryptocurrency. That's nothing, and that's all $0 profit. If the ransom was 5 million and they got it down to 1 million, they're not trying to keep 2 million of that. That's just part of the services they offer.
Yeah, and I think that's an important highlight is the fact that it's customers' first time dealing with ransomware. It's not the first time they're dealing with a negotiation. If they're dealing with a firm whose one of their purposes is to deal with and work with customers and deal with on the negotiation side, it's not it's something that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's not the first time for them like it would be for a customer.
Totally. Yeah, this firm handles over 100 cases a month, so they're very familiar with it, to Mike's point. And then lastly, ending downtime, right? So they have another tool called UniDecrypt that will help you actually decrypt the data, right? And this works with over 100 different variants. And what's really important to understand about this is I think there's a misconception that if we pay the ransom, the attacker will just give us a decryption tool and we'll use that. Well, there's a couple problems with that. Number one, it's very insecure. You don't know what exactly that could do to your environment. Number two, it's really more a performance issue. Oftentimes these are very, very single threaded. But something that's nice about UniDecrypt is that you can take whatever key that they provide and run it through the UniDecrypt tool to help verify if this is something that's usable and incorporate it into the product, which is really nice. So step 2 here, right? I think a lot of these steps are going to seem obvious, but it's just important to highlight and have an understanding of the steps you're going to take. But step 2 is determining if the Veeam server was compromised, right? Was it compromised? Was it encrypted? Was it deleted? Anything like that. And what's nice and what we talked about earlier is the beauty of Veeam is, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, it does matter, but even if it was, it's really easy to go deploy a new Veeam server. And whether you have it configured backup to recover from or not, you're still able to recover your backup files, right? That's one of the main value propositions of Veeam to begin with. It's great to have that config backup, but really that's to restore your session history, your infrastructure, your job history, things like that. You can still scan your backup repository and start recovering without any of that information, which is really all you want to be doing when you're in this type of situation. You're not worried about, if my jobs that I created populate again.
And I think it really highlights the different tiers of the zero trust architecture we've gone with. Veeam is the backup management system is fairly non-volatile. It's where we're storing the data, where the data is located, having the ability to get to it, point to it in the case of a disaster, just slap in another management system, or as Brad had stated, if it's case where you're executing a restore of your configuration to get access to it, the data is the important part. The management system, the infrastructure used to produce the backups is fairly non-volatile.
And then step 3 here, right? So oftentimes the critical path to a successful recovery is quickly finding a clean backup, right? And this is where Yara rules comes in, which is something we introduced in 12.1 as well, right? So Yara stands for yet another recursive acronym, which is a funny meaning. But really the power of Yara is that, right, an AV scan is something you absolutely are still going to do during a ransomware recovery, but Yara helps you identify a good starting point. And what I mean by that is once the incident's been declared, you know exactly what you're looking for. You know the type of file extensions that they put on these machines, the type of encryption scheme they put on these machines, and you're able to then create a Yara rule for that, something your security team will be very, very familiar with, and quickly scan each backup until Veeam create this Yara rule and quickly scan each backup until Veeam finds a restore point that doesn't have that Yara rule, doesn't have those variables, essentially being a clean backup. And then that's a great starting point for you to then recover that restore point to a clean room, then do additional AV scans and forensics as a starting point to then hopefully migrate that to production. And then step 4, we kind of just touched on it, but then making sure you're avoiding reinfection. So like I mentioned, so unfortunately, it seems it's over half of customers reinfect upon restore because they're restoring directly into production. They're skipping this Yara role. They're skipping this clean room recovery where they're doing the additional AV scan. So it's just important to include that into your process of an incident response. The most important step we're finally here is actually recovering your data. And unfortunately, respondents to this survey said on average, it took them 3.5 weeks to recover. And I would attribute a lot of that to this Gartner report. So this is a report from Gartner that essentially did a report on how to recover from ransomware effectively. And literally the number one key finding at the top of this report is it says recovering from traditional backup won't suffice during a cyber incident recovery. And essentially what they're referring to here is just recovering from a disk-based repository and backups is not enough, because you need to have multiple layers that you're recovering from, right? That's going to be your backup repository. That's going to be your primary storage snapshots or your replica storage snapshots if you've been replicating that. That's going to be your actual hypervisor replicas if you have any of those. It's the combination of being able to recover from multiple of those layers to give you a successful recovery. And part of the reason sometimes people say, well, hey, I only keep snapshots for 3 days. If they've been in my network encrypting data for a week, then I'm not going to be able to recover from snapshots. Well, that's a little bit of a misconception. Oftentimes, you're still going to recover, unfortunately, dirty data. You're still going to recover this infected data to this clean room, and then the forensics team, the security team, the incident response team is going to come in and use tools like Unidecrypt from Coveware or other decryption tools and still scrub that data clean. So still having copies that are able to be recovered much more quickly than off of a disk-based repository is a very powerful option.